Hey guys, I'm Preetam,
And I'm Alan.
and welcome to the Enlightened Otaku podcast. On this podcast, we're going to go over some of your favorite anime, and we're going to try to tease out some of the interesting philosophical ideas behind them. Our mission really is, at the end of this podcast, to leave you with one insight that you can apply in your daily lives, and we're hoping to do that in an entertaining way and leave you with a few laughs as you listen along.
Definitely. And for those of you who have been following us since last year, we have recently rebranded from the Anime Philosophers to the Enlightened Otaku. And we feel like this rebranding is a better description of what we're trying to do than the Anime Philosophers. The Anime Philosophers was maybe a little bit too generic. The Enlightened Otaku has the philosophical aspect of it, seeking enlightenment, but at the same time, it has the entertaining aspect, which, as Preetam said, part of our mission statement. Besides coming up with great ideas from popular anime, is to entertain you guys as you listen to us.
It's still the same us if you're coming back and listening to us. If you're one of our subscribers, we're going to be doing basically the same thing that we were doing on the Anime Philosophers. Just wanted to talk about the rebranding. We also wanted to maybe use this as an opportunity to introduce ourselves again for any new listeners. Because I think the last time we talked about ourselves was like a year ago, on one of the first podcasts for the Anime Philosophers, and we've been on a hiatus now for like several months.
Yep.
So let's get back into it by talking a little bit about us, and we thought we could do this in a little bit of a fun way. We have a couple of questions we came up with that we thought would be kind of fun and would kind of reveal a lot about us based on our answers. So let's jump straight into that.
Yeah, let's do it. So the first question, Preetam, what was your first anime that introduced you into this wonderful world?
Wow. First anime. So for sure I can say Dragon Ball Z's got to be on there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it was the first. What I will say is the first show that I started watching anime on was, without a doubt, Toonami on Cartoon Network.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the US-based viewers will know about Toonami in the 90s, but it's basically one of the greatest shows ever and still has a huge fan base today. Mm-hmm. And Toonami, if I remember right, when I first started watching, was showing Dragon Ball Z. It was showing, I think, some Gundam Wing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It was showing, and I think maybe Tenchi Muyo. So those were the kind of the anime that I started out with, and Dragon Ball Z was really the biggest one. But also Yu Yu Hakusho as well.
Yu Yu Hakusho.
So probably DBZ, Yu Yu Hakusho, Tenchi Muyo were kind of my first anime.
Nice, yeah. That's like a nice way to get introduced into the world of anime.
Yeah. All right, now it's your turn.
Yeah. So for me, so actually I grew up in Europe, in Eastern Europe, for those of you guys who don't know. So I was introduced to slightly different anime there. Of course, the first consistent anime that I watched was also DBZ. Like one of the main ones, one of my favorite back then. Although I didn't look at it for the philosophical aspect back then, I would say. But earlier than that, maybe a little bit. One of the anime that I kind of watched on and off was a very old anime. I think it was probably made back in the 70s, called Tiger Man. I don't know how many users actually, how many of the listeners know about this, but it's an anime about this wrestler who would wear this tiger mask, and his whole philosophy was that he would never fight dirty when wrestling, even if his life was on the line. So I found that very interesting. I was like 4 years old when I watched it. So those were the main ones. I guess by the end of the 90s, Pokemon was also big.
Right.
But those were the main ones. that got me started into it. And then it was much later that I started going deeper into the anime world after I moved to the U.S. actually.
Okay, cool. All right, so we got a nice diverse background there. Okay.
We do, yeah.
All right, so moving on to the next question. Top 3 favorite anime and why? So, Alan, you can start this time.
All right. So for the top 3, sometimes it's hard to pick because there are so many good ones out there. But I think both me and Preetam agree on this. The number 1 is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and I think, for me at least, one of the things that makes it at the very top is the fact that the characters, there's such a richness of characters in that anime, not just in the main characters with the Elric brothers, but a richness in personality in all the characters, and also in the philosophical concept of toka koka, which is, you can't get, in order to get somewhere you have to give something. I like one of the main things in Full Metal Brotherhood as well is this whole concept of everything kind of recycles onto itself. The whole universe, there's this flow of everything breaks down and then gets recombined. So that's the number 1. We can talk in much more detail in later podcasts about the philosophical underpinnings there. But number 2 and 3, this was a tough pick, but I have to say Death Note would be my number 2.
Okay.
There's a lot of back and forth there. I'll discuss more also about the main character, which is Light, in the next question where we're talking about the characters. But it's one of those, I think I've heard it being described as like the gateway anime into like the philosophical context, because it's very appealing to a lot of people who don't think about things in a philosophical way in anime, but it also has some very deep concepts as well. And my third one actually was the first half of Naruto. So Naruto up until maybe a little bit after the battle with Pain, without the fillers, of course. And the thing with Naruto as well is that what I like is that no character is portrayed as black and white. So every character has its own his own positive motives and its own negative motives, and it's a very rich anime in that respect. So those are my top 3. How about you, Preetam?
Yeah. So number 1 for me is Berserk. It's
Okay.
not Brotherhood anymore.
Not Brotherhood anymore?
Yeah, so my number one is Berserk. But Berserk probably because, well, it's the universe is very interesting because there's no there's a concept of the idea of evil in Berserk, and that's like the guiding force of fate and destiny in the world of Berserk. It isn't neutral, and it isn't good either. And usually in most anime, it's either neutral or good. Like the idea of fate and destiny and things like that. But in Berserk, it's the opposite way. It's perverted, and it's the idea of evil that actually dictates the fate of humanity, which I find absolutely fascinating. I think Berserk is really, in my opinion, is truly an archetypal anime. So there's so many symbols in it, and the universe is just fascinating. Mm-hmm. It's one of the few anime that's so dark that you don't get to see that all the time. So it's nice that someone tells the other side of the story. That's why I like Berserk. I also really like it because of the characters, but we'll get to that. Number two has got to be. It's actually very hard for me to pick because I have a lot of favorite anime, and rank ordering them is hard because they feel like they're slightly different, but they all occupy the same space. But number 2 would have to probably be Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Again, Alan already discussed that. We share a lot of the same opinions on that. I think we both like it for many of the same reasons. The principle of tokakoka, equivalent exchange, I think is one of the most fundamental principles in the world. So,
Right.
like in physics, we call it, conservation of energy. Tokakoka is just extending that a little bit wider to it's more of a metaphysical principle than a physical principle. So I think that's really cool. I think it's cool that you can base the whole anime on that. The characters are fascinating. Every single one of them is interesting, and particularly Hiromi Arakawa's her insight into human psychology, I would argue, with things like how she portrays the character Greed in Full Metal Alchemist. Probably one of my favorite characters in there, other than Ed, of course. But Greed has... it's fascinating how Hiromi Arakawa plays with the idea of greed. And she flips it around, right? Just going with the idea of how everything's connected. She connects greed with its opposite, and she talks about how, pretty much everything can be understood to be a form of greed. Even all the virtuous,
Right.
characteristics in a person. So I find things like that fascinating when you flip things around and I think as Nietzsche would say, you stand truth on her head, but there are many ways to put it. So
We'll mention
anyway,
Nietzsche
that's
a lot too.
so that's number 2. Number 3 has got to be, and like I said, I don't like rank ordering these, but
Right.
number 3 has got to be Hunter x Hunter for me.
Okay.
I'll get more into it. A lot of the reasons why I like these animes probably because of the characters. So again, next question, we'll get into that. But the Hunter x Hunter world is fascinating because I've always kind of thought that, life should be like an interesting adventure, right? And that's what makes it exciting. And Hunter x Hunter, like the whole universe, like the whole story is based around the concept of Gon becoming a hunter, right? A hunter is someone who goes out and explores the world and, pushes further and takes on interesting missions and is part of this elite group and they have to train to get into it. I thought that's a really cool idea. So that's got to be my number 3. That's 1, 2, and 3. It's really hard for me to pick those, but I guess I
Right.
have to. And I must throw in Steins Gate as well.
Yeah.
I know I can only pick 3, but Steins
Honorary
Gate...
mentions, dude.
Yeah, it's an honorary mention for Steins Gate. Yeah.
Yeah. Steins Gate is one of my honorary mentions as well. So yeah, out of the either the top anime that you mentioned or any of the other honorary mentioned anime, what do you think? What are your top 3 characters and why?
Top 3 favorite characters and why. Okay. So number 1, man, this one's hard too. So I haven't really thought these questions through. I just came up with the questions, and I'm answering it on the spot. If I had to pick a character, man, this is really hard. But okay, I don't think I can rank order the top 3, but I'm just gonna say in whatever order it comes to me. Number 1, since I said Berserk, number 1 first. Number 1 character has got to be Guts from Berserk, the protagonist. The reason I respect him is because, man, it's hard to capture the character in words. But I guess if I had to say it, it's his absolute relentless determination to get what he wants. And I think that's a common thread probably amongst all 3 characters that I'm going to mention, I think. So I think I have just distilled what I like about characters. But yeah, first character Guts, because relentless determination. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong to him went wrong with him. And to still see him struggling on. His nickname is the Struggler, for all you Berserk viewers. So he continues to struggle on. And you gotta respect the man. Also, he's like a freaking monster, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think he's supposed to be like 6'8", and I think he's supposed to weigh like 400 something pounds. So the guy's a monster.
Yeah.
The guy's a monster, and he wields like the biggest sword I've ever seen. So he's all-time badass. That's number one. Number two has got to be. Man, it's hard. It's really hard. But number two, I'll say Edward Elric, just because.
Okay.
He's probably been in my top three character set the longest out of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I saw Fullmetal Alchemist, he was in that top three for sure, and he's remained in that top three since then. And I think when I watched Brotherhood, it was around 2012 or 2013. So it's been about 6 years, I'd say, since Brotherhood. He's still one of my top favorite characters. Edward, it's the same thing. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over again because it's the same with him. It's relentless devotion to his mission, right? So you gotta love that. I mean, look at Ed's situation, right? He starts out absolutely tragic, loses an arm and leg while trying to bring back his mother. Loses his brother's entire body. In that tragic accident. But still manages to come back. And like one of my favorite scenes from FMA is when I'm just going to assume everyone has seen FMA, but if you haven't, you can just tune out for a bit.
Right.
But when Mustang comes over to Resin to recruit the Eldricks, and he sees Ed in the wheelchair. And and they like zoom in on his eyes, and they're like dead, basically.
Yeah.
And then Roy, Mustang offering him a way out. He says, "Well, if you join the military, and you become a state alchemist, well, we may be able to get you the funds so that you can go ahead and do the research you need to do to figure out how to get your brother's body back." So he says, "Come with me. Come to Central. Take the exam. If you study well for it, become a state alchemist." And then, like, if I remember correctly, at the end of that scene, Mustang leaves. Mustang leaves, and Riza Hawkeye, his assistant, Hawkeye, as they're leaving, like, she says, "Wow, that's horrible. Did you see the look in Ed's eyes? Like, there's like nothing there." And then Mustang says, "Really? I saw fire in those eyes." And then it pans back to Ed, and you can see him, and now there's like this fresh determination in his eyes as he realizes, hey, maybe there's a way out of this. So that's got to be one of my favorite scenes. That's number two. Okay, number three. Number three is this is too hard. This is so hard. Since I have to pick the third one, and I'll go with the anime that I picked. It'll make it a little easier for me. The third one, for Hunter x Hunter, my favorite character is probably... Damn, even this one's hard. My favorite character has got to be Jing.
Okay.
Crazy determination. With Jing is fascinating because the first two, well, a lot of the characters, right, they have a mission, right? So... going with Alan's favorite anime, if you look at, Naruto, he wants to be Hokage, right? It's very clear. His mission is super clear. And I think you can say that about a lot of the characters in anime, right? That's how you can rally behind them. Having a clear mission like that is very powerful. But Jing is interesting because he does not have a clear mission. And in fact, when his son Gon asked him, what do you want? He answered, "What's not in front of me." And I'll never forget that, like, my entire life. And that simple phrase has really affected how I think about a lot of things, because it really resonated with me. And so, I respect Jing a lot for having the determination, for finding a way, and for going after whatever it is that he wants at that moment, and for not even having a clear mission, a clear objective or anything like that. But the fact that he abstracted it away, he figured out what it really was. It wasn't the concrete thing of getting A, B, or C.
Right.
Rather, he realized it was achieving something that most people would argue he never had a chance of achieving. So I find that fascinating. I also find his ability to like really focus on one thing super hard and just go bananas on it, like, you know what I mean, like 200% on it, is something I respect a lot. A lot of the things he says, like he says things like, you know, go on the is so he says like enjoy taking the little detours in life because that's where you find the things you really want. Little things like that. He tells his son that basically.
Right.
Yeah, and you start to realize how true some of these things are. So little things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right. So for my top three, I've actually thought about what my favorite character in Full Metal Brotherhood is, and although initially, you know, Ed was obviously near the top, the more I thought about it, the more I'm drawn to the character of Van Hohenheim, who is the father of the Elric brothers. You know, besides the fact that he has a really cool name, I think that the cool thing about him, first of all, he's one of the oldest characters in the show. He's been around for like 500 years or something ridiculous like that, and he's been through a lot of misfortunes, and he really, I mean, for those, I'm assuming everyone has watched the show, you know, he has at the end, you know, he's given this very long longevity because he has the souls of all the population that was sacrificed for the Philosopher's Stones, right? By like 500 years back. And he can actually hear their voices. The interesting thing about him, though, is that it's very easy for a normal person to have broken under those conditions, especially for 500 years. And I think it's easy to become energetic about a goal if you can see that you can achieve that goal in the somewhat near future. But if something drags for a long time, for centuries in his case, and he still kept at it, kept trying to overcome the dwarf in the flask, as it was, which is also a very interesting character in that anime. The fact he kept going and he had the patience and, you know, for 500 odd years to continue, I think that makes him a very, very interesting character. So that's Van Hohenheim, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this later on. The other one, I guess when we're talking about Naruto, probably my favorite character there would have to be Pain. And the reason for that, you know, he's not even... That's the thing with the Naruto characters, is that even the adversarial characters are not... It's not always black and white. So he's introduced as a leader of Akatsuki and this really evil guy, but really he is driven by a very noble goal, which is to break the chain of hatred, as he says. You know, when he was little, he was a war orphan. His country was ravaged by war, and he really wanted to break the chain of hatred. Now, the way he went about it in the anime, you know, we can debate on whether that was the best way, but he was really driven by a noble goal. And in one of the scenes when he was a kid, hanging out with the other orphan friends, and he said, you know, it wasn't Pain himself, but it was his friend who later died and became like the main of the Pain characters. He said that I'm gonna bring peace into the world, and his friend are like, how are you gonna do that? That's impossible. You'd have to be some kind of a god to do that. And he said, then I'll become a god and bring peace into the world. So that's the second one. There's a lot more to say about that, but I'll leave it for another podcast when we discuss Naruto in more detail. And in Death Note, yeah, I'd have to say Light. Light is also a very interesting guy because, I mean, besides the fact that he is very intelligent and very driven, it gets to the point where he also starts out wanting to better the world. And in fact, I think until the very end, he truly believes that he is building a better world for people. And it's very interesting. He wants to make himself kind of like the god of the new world. And all of these characters that like Light, or like Pain as well, who try to lead the world, try to improve the world in their own way, they remind me a little bit, actually, of, if you're talking about Plato, of the philosopher kings that Plato postulated as like the ultimate leaders, like the best leaders that the nation could have, that show the way. And what I like there is a dichotomy between, having this really noble desire to improve the world, on the one hand, and on the other hand, all these good intentions leading to hell down the line, leading to a world that probably you would not describe as a utopia. So I'm actually, as in a historical context as well, I'm actually fascinated by this concept of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think characters like Light portray that very well.
All right, cool. So we have a lot of diversity already, we can see.
Yeah.
Which is cool. All right, so let's move on. These answers are taking a bit longer than I anticipated. Oh no. I hope it's not another 30-minute long one. We'll see. We'll see. We're doing our best here, by the way.
Yeah.
All right, okay, so let's move on. Okay, so the next question is, why are you attracted to philosophy? And going along with that, who are your favorite philosophers? Or perhaps favorite works, favorite books?
Mm-hmm. Well, the answer to the first question, why I'm attracted to philosophy, it's actually quite simple. It provides a framework for understanding the world for me. So the world is already complex enough as it is, and without having some kind of framework to kind of orient yourself, it's very likely that you might make mistakes or not know where you're going. Maybe you'll hit upon a precious resource eventually, but it helps to have a framework. As far as my favorite philosophers in terms of historical context, I mean, I do like, going back to ancient times, I do like the Platonic and the Socratic kind of schools of thought with, the Platonic theory of forms and like the reaching this ideal perfection and whatnot. It's kind of abstract, so it's not everyone's cup of tea, but
definitely not mine.
Right.
You'll see when you get to my answers.
Right. But it inspires a lot of people to kind of search for this perfect form, if you will, in an abstract way. So I enjoy that. Okay. I've also I've gone through phases in my life as well, where I've sometimes liked some philosophers more than others. I would say during my high school years, I was attracted to Emerson and Thoreau, the transcendentalists in the United States in the 19th century, where I really liked their nature of philosophy, the kind of going their own way and getting close to nature and kind of questioning the orthodox views of their time. And more recently, of course, it's been Nietzsche. He was deeper than was being portrayed. Most people think of him as the philosopher who said, God is dead. And most people think of it as a nihilist kind of take on life. But his philosophy was really was kind of a break with the earlier philosophies of the Western tradition. It's a questioning of the morality of the day and a reevaluation of values.
Yeah, so I think this is good because that's why I really wanted to do these questions. I'm just taking a pause before I answer because you're getting to see, like, even though we both enjoy a lot of the same anime, the intersection of our favorite anime is larger than than the opposite. But you can also see that we both have like very different particular interests, right? So even though we may enjoy the like, we both enjoy Brotherhood a lot, but the reasons why we enjoy it are so different, and I think that's fascinating, and it's one of the reasons why we put this podcast together, just to show, to get all of these kind of different ideas together, and show that you can be on the same wavelength, even though you're interested in all sorts of different things. It's fascinating that you can still agree that this is a great show, even though and each of you sees certain kinds of gems in it that the other did not see. So
Right.
fascinating, and I think that's I think one of the defining characteristics of a great anime is that people who have different backgrounds, different interests,
Yep.
different personality types. I think Alan and I have very different personality types. Even with all of those different things, we can still enjoy the same thing. So that's really cool.
Yep.
All right. So getting back to the question, why am I attracted to philosophy? What are some of my favorite philosophers? Why am I attracted to philosophy? So I am very, very concerned with how to live well. This is a question that I am absolutely obsessed with. And for me, it isn't about fancy metaphysics or anything like that, but it's really about, hey, if there's one constant in the real world, I would argue it's the fact that you will encounter obstacles. There's no way around it. Problems. I say that a lot. Like, is there anything true of the world? I would say problems. Okay, problems are always there. And so the question is, how do you deal with those problems? And I think over time, people have seen the same sorts of problems over and over and over again. And they've tried all sorts of different ways to deal with those problems. And a couple of them have been more successful than the others. And of course, certain ways of solving problems resonate with certain kinds of people. And I think over time, those solutions to these common patterns in life are distilled down into philosophies. And philosophy is really a fancy word, but it's really just a good way of dealing with life. So that's how I think of philosophy. And that's why I enjoy it, because I think it's probably one of the most useful things you can ever have. Which is like a very powerful general set of tools to deal with challenges that you come across in your life, right? So, I mean, who doesn't want that toolbox, right? I sure as hell want to stuff that thing with everything I can get. So that's why I like philosophy. Who are some of my favorite philosophers, favorite works by philosophers? Okay, this one's going to be interesting. So I would say I've always been attracted to more of the Eastern school of philosophy. And probably I would have to say it's really the fascination with Zen, I'd say, for me, probably. I've also always been interested in Buddhism and things like that. Also some elements of Hinduism, but definitely Zen for me. And the reason why Zen is fascinating to me is because it's one of the few philosophies that doesn't have a lot of written works. Like it isn't like, hey, the Bible of Zen. It doesn't exist, There isn't even one concrete book that explains Zen, the principles of Zen, because Zen almost is an unprincipled philosophy. It's like it doesn't have principles, at least not principles that can be logically or rationally discussed. So it's very unique, and I really, really like the fact that a lot of these philosophies are interesting because they make you look at the orthodox in a different way, right? But Zen makes you look at thinking in a different way. So it's gone one layer back, and I always love what some people have said about Zen, which is that it's the great annihilator, right? It's the great annihilator of all your preconceptions of thought and logic and reason and the way you do things. So it advocates a more irrational view of the world. At least one that can't be put into words so much, but must be felt. And it's really about the direct experience of things, rather than some philosophical, essay on how things should be. So Zen is very cool. Other than Zen, it's got to be probably Nietzsche. Just because I've kind of been reading him a lot recently, and Nietzsche's cool for me. Like Alan talked about, master-slave morality, stuff like that. For me, Nietzsche is always, it's really because of his reevaluation of values, or transvaluation of all values, which his last incomplete book. But I think another thing I've always been fascinated with is values, right? Because I told you the whole reason I'm interested in philosophy is how to live well, right? And in order to answer how to live well, you need to understand, what are the things you value, what are the things you like, all right? And so, Nietzsche took the orthodox values of his time, Christianity, etc., and asked a heretic question, honestly. He said, what are the value of these values? That's
super meta.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there you go. That's Nietzsche for you. Yeah, so he questioned the values of the prevailing values, and since then, I think Western philosophy hasn't been the same. So he's one of the few Western philosophers that I actually enjoy reading. So that's, I think, is special. Though most of the time I prefer the Eastern guys. With Nietzsche, I actually like reading him. So, and we'll discuss more about him and stuff. So don't worry if none of this makes sense or whatever. But we're gonna refer to them a lot and try to connect a lot of things in the anime we watch to these philosophers, because a lot of the anime we do watch does have lots of elements of these guys' works.
Yeah, definitely.
We have one more. Why do you think anime is a good stage for discussing philosophy?
Yeah, so this one, I've thought about this. Anime has always been compelling for me and always gives me this great ideas, and I think same with Freedom. And I think probably the main reason is that all the characters portrayed in anime are just such extreme versions of personality types in real life. They're really personality types that I think you'd be hard pressed to see them in real life. They're so extreme in so many ways that it's only by portraying these extremes that you kind of derive lessons from life. In the sense that they have the drive that some of the anime characters have, for example. It's almost unmatched in real life, because maybe in the anime world you can kind of ignore the limits of biology, for example, or the laws of physics. You can, and because you can kind of play around with making each character as extreme in one dimension or several dimensions as possible, it kind of gives you. It kind of works as a thought experiment of how a world would be if a certain character would act this way, or if I were to act this way, And I think just like in real life, whenever you push something to the extreme, whenever you experience some extreme in life, you derive lessons from it. In the same way with anime, when you see a story which describes some really extreme event or some really extreme character, you also derive lessons for it.
Yeah, I have to pretty much agree with that. I would add a little bit more, which is that, I think any sort of narrative form, I think, is perfect for messing around with philosophy. I think if you look at a lot of the great philosophers, they even use narrative forms themselves. If you look at, let's just go back to some philosophers I don't like. You look at Plato, but he uses Socrates. Yeah. He uses the idea of a dialectic, right? A dialogue.
They do.
Between two people. It's almost like a story. It's a conversation between people.
They do,
right?
Yeah.
Right? It's not like
they do.
This is A, this is B. Here are my axioms.
Right,
da 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 da.
It's interesting because Plato himself was asked this question, how come you're not following a formal system of rules when explaining stuff? And he said that it doesn't have as much of an impact as a story.
Anime is really cool because for some reason it seems to consistently be good anime, every year, that have all of these great lessons in them. And I think it's one of the most underexplored, perhaps, genres for this kind of thing, just because everyone knows, the common person knows, anime as fan service, and
Right.
stuff
Right.
like that. And it's absolutely there. It's absolutely there. But there's all of this great stuff too behind the scenes.
Definitely.
So we thought this, we want to talk about the good stuff. Also have some fun, fun in the process too. I mean, who can argue against fan service? Actually, one of the
was Zen Service.
One of our names for the podcast was Zen Service. So yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, we just think there's a lot of hidden gems in anime, and we want to talk about it because we don't see that many people talking about it. So.
Right. Yeah, and I mean to add a little bit to that, to the story thing, if you can think about ancient times, people had mythologies, and if you think about it, even to this day, the mythological stories, whether you're talking about Greek mythologies or Norse mythology or Hindu mythology, whatever religious tradition in the past, they had this powerful influence on people, and I think anime is a modern day version of that. I think we discussed this in one of our earlier episodes when we had Anime Philosophers, but it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Modern day mythos.
Yep.
All right. Cool. So hopefully with this, you guys get a little bit more of an idea of the kind of people we are, what we're interested in, what makes us, get excited. Because we're going to be talking about that kind of stuff a lot, and we hope that you too will be excited about this stuff and leave your comments on what you think is exciting, because like I said, every podcast we read the comments, we talk about some of those ideas. Our last run, when we were discussing the Ancient Magus' Bride last year, we had a lot of great comments from some of our listeners, stuff that we never even considered.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons we're doing this, so that we can learn from you guys too. We just want to create a place where we can discuss these ideas.
Yeah. And if you guys have any suggestions on other anime we can cover, leave them in the comments. We're thinking of going back to some of the older historical anime and also analyzing them. They really can be on any genre.
Yeah. Absolutely. Again, we were thinking, we're going to try to keep this podcast coming out every other week. And we'll try to discuss any of the good anime that's going on in the current season. Try to connect to some of the interesting ideas we were talking about earlier in the show. And then we'll also do, perhaps, if there's interest in it, and we'll try it out with some of the historical anime, some of the older anime that's aired, a couple of years ago or whatever, that we think is worth a watch or rewatch even. We'll go ahead and try to distill some of the important concepts in that and do more focused videos and podcasts on those things. Yeah, let's wrap it up right here. Hopefully it's not too long. We'll see. But I think it's definitely entertaining. So
Yep.
we will be getting tighter and tighter as the season goes on.
Yep.
All right, guys. So thanks a lot for tuning in. And remember to stay inspired.